All right, here's part 2 to our healing brush or our healing a picture tutorial. Briefly, again, in the first part we went through the steps of using these layer masks here. You can see here where we started to actually cut out just the bad parts of the picture and we replaced them like down here by the hand. I didn't go back and clean them up yet still, but you get the idea. So then the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to work with a couple of tools. The first one we're going to work with is over here. It's called the cloning stamp. Now make sure, again, if they have a little triangle in the corner, you can see two different tools. You want to use the cloning stamp tool. All right. I am going to zoom in a little bit just for the purposes of this demonstration. Let's zoom in on this guy's face here. All right. Now the idea of the cloning stamp really is you are going to be copying one area of your photo into another area of that photo. So basically you're just targeting something you want to copy from, and then you're selecting the area you want to copy into. All right. Now, first of all, most importantly, just like any procedure here, as you get more layers and more layer masks, it becomes a little more complicated. So take it slow, and remember that if I want to copy this eyeball, for say, let's say I want to give him a third eye here on his forehead, I need to make sure that I look through my layers and I select the proper layer, and I'm also selecting the picture of the man and the little boy. That's where sometimes here where it says layer 0, if I double click on my layer, I can rename it man, boy. All right, so that way I just know, because like these little pictures get really hard to see, so you might label what those are. But I'm not going to take time to do that. All right, so I click on that picture, I come over here. Now what I'm going to do is I want his eyeball, so I'm going to make that just a little bit smaller, just like that. I'm going to hold down the Option key on my keyboard, and what happens while I'm holding down the Option key is this becomes a little target. All right. When I see, like I'm going to put that target right in the middle of the area that I want to copy from, I'm going to click once with my mouse. Click. All right, you saw it sort of changed its color a little bit, it faded. I'm going to let go of the Option key again. I'm letting go because when I hold down the Option key, it's a target. I'm going to let go, and I'm going to move this up here. Now look at that. It's copying that eyeball, and I can place it anywhere I want to as my target, right? But I'm copying that, and I'm going to click with my mouse, and I'm going to start painting. Right? And if you look under the original eye, you'll see a little X floating around down there. And basically what it's saying is that whatever is in that X is being copied into my paintbrush circle. All right, so it's copying that eye. So I just gave him a third eye. Now the only problem with this eyeball is that the outside edge of it is really sharp. So remember, your cloning stamp has the same properties that your paintbrush does. So right now the hardness of my brush is 100%. I'm going to turn that down to 0%. All right. So now I'm going to go back here. I'm going to go to, I'm going to go to step backwards. There we go. I'm going to make sure that stepping back didn't change my brush. It didn't. It's at 0%. All right. I'm going to Option click again on my eye. So I'm going to say Option, click. I'm going to come up here again, and I'm going to paint my eye. All right, and that painted a little bit better because you can see now that as the edges of this are not that hard, crisp edge, but they're sort of feathered into the background. Now the only thing about the healing brush is that it's not like a layer mask like this. It's actually changing the picture. So once I put that on there, it's sort of there to stay. All right, and if I want to get rid of it, I would have to do something like sample his forehead. I'm going to Option click some of his forehead here. I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to paint his forehead back on top of that. Or I can step backwards, but you get the point that once it's on there, it's permanent. Now the thing about the cloning stamp is great because you can clone parts of your piece that are missing. So some of these areas in here, like this crack, some different things like that, you can come in. Let's zoom in a little bit. Where's my boy here? There he is. And you can copy things over. So like for his cheek here, for instance, I could use the cloning stamp. I'm going to make that brush much smaller. All right, again, I'm using my parentheses keys to do that. I'm going to Option click his cheek here, let go of the Option key after I click with my mouse, and I'm going to paint his cheek on top of this. All right, that looks pretty good. It looks a little bit like he's got a black eye here. But I'm going to show you some other tools in the future too that might also help with that. But it's just important to know that it's a great tool for, let me zoom out here a little bit too so I can see what I'm doing. It's a great tool for copying things directly onto that surface. Okay, so let's. Here, I want to make an example of this here. just pay no attention to this for a second. I just want to set something up so that I can do an example here. All right, so with your eye selected, let's use my cloning stamp here. I'm going to make it bigger again using the parentheses. I'm going to option click. When I click on this eye and I paint it up here, all right, it is covering 100% of that background, so I can see that eye exactly. All right, I have another tool called the healing brush, which is this little band-aid here. And again, if you hold down on this, you'll see some other tools underneath. You want to make sure it says healing brush. It is very similar, let me shrink this down, to the cloning stamp, except for, watch, I'm going to option key, click once in the eye, let go, come up here, and I'm going to paint. All right. Initially, it looks like it's the same, but watch when I let go. It's much lighter because the cloning stamp takes 100% of this eye and it puts 100% wherever you're copying it to. The healing brush, the Band-Aid, takes 50% of the pixels in this particular eyeball and 50% of the background, which here is white, and it blends those two together. So it makes that eye look lighter. So now you'd say, well, why would you do that? Because what that does nicely is instead of just being like this stamp that like makes this permanent mark, it actually blends. So like for here, I'm blending that together. It helps to blend things together so they look more natural. A lot of times that that cloning stamp makes like a real hard blob on there and it just looks really strange. But the healing brush makes sort of a soft blend and it really makes a nice, difficult to see transition. The cloning stamp is good for, like if I were trying to put something into an area that had no color, if I wanted to just like build something, I could build it with the cloning brush. But the healing brush is good for just sampling little areas. All right, so that's just really basically the difference of the two. So like some of these cracks in here, so let me zoom into his neck here. Some of these cracks I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to option click. Let's do some healing brush here. I'm going to option click his neck and I'm going to just heal on top of that crack. What that does, see how it made it sort of disappear? It's good because it's blending it in. You know, some of these cracks where there's not a lot of white space, I can sample some of his neck here with an option click. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to paint on his neck. And it's going to blend. You know, it also sort of hides the pattern that sort of develops. Like here you can see that this dark line here and this dark line here, it almost looks like a weird texture. So I'm going to option key, click once with my mouse, let go, and I'm going to paint a lighter color on top of that darker color. It sort of blended in a little bit better. Right? So again, it's not like right on top of the other, but it's blending them together. It's like mixing paint a little bit. All right, so that's one tool, or two tools actually, sorry. Another tool you can use here, the spot healer, is just a quick little tool. It's really actually pretty great. I can change the size of it. And what it does is instead of option clicking anything, what it's going to do is if I just click, it's going to sample automatically. It's just going to choose a little area adjacent to that circle, meaning right outside the circle, and it's going to copy it 50% into that spot. So it really is great for taking care of these little, I'm just tapping once with my mouse here, those little dust and scratches. Now the only problem is like if I have, oops, sorry, my computer's acting up here. If I have a spot like this, and I click on it, actually that didn't do too bad. Let me make the brush a little bigger. There we go. You can see here when I just clicked on it, it sampled two other lines from another part of this area. And so that actually worked out. But these lines didn't line up. It was sort of weird. So this spot tool is really only good for, here you can see it actually copied a crack into that hole, which is not very good. And that's better, second choice. It's good for just getting rid of like little dust and scratches and particles and stuff like that. All right. You know, again, you as an artist, as a worker with these tools, have to decide which tools are best. I mean, you know, in your toolbox, as a plumber, you would have all sorts of different tools, but you would probably only use some of the same tools over and over because, you know, you're really good with them and they're kind of your favorite tools. All right, this last tool that I'm going to show you here today is this patch tool. All right, the patch tool is great because what the patch tool does is it selects an area. So I'm going to select, let's select this part of his cheek here. So let's go to our magnifying glass first. Let's zoom in a little bit. All right, let's get that patch tool right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to outline this crack here, all right, as close as I can get. And it's going to make a selection. Now, if I go into the center here, I see my tool changed a little bit. I'm going to drag it out of the selection, and look what it does. It's going to copy 50% of whatever I'm going to go over into 50% of that cheek. So down here, if there's a lot of cracks and stuff, I'm going to go up here and sample his forehead, maybe where it's a little bit darker. See how I'm trying to match the skin tone? I'm going to let go. All right, I'm going to go select, deselect, or Command D. And look at that, it got rid of that scratch. Pretty cool, right? So, you know, like some of these other ones here, we use the cloning or the healer for this, but we can also use the patch tool. I'm going to grab this, I'm going to drag it out here. That starts to disappear. I'm going to let go. I'm going to say select, deselect again, and there you go. It sort of cleans it up. Now, when you use any of these tools, again, you want to make sure that you're cloning, you're selecting the layer you want to clone from. So if I were to come down here and want to work on this hand, I mean, there's really not much to do with the hand because it's, you know, it's a nice smooth hand from the internet. But I couldn't sample anything like with my cloning stamp. If I option click this hand, like I option click the thumb, and I start drawing, it's actually not option clicking the thumb, it's option clicking this, the space that's on the layer, the man boy layer that's way underneath the thumb right there. All right, if that makes sense. You know, if it doesn't make sense, just know that you have to make sure that you're clicking on these pictures here on the right layer so that you're cloning to and from that same layer for now. Okay. Finally, just a couple of tips. After you smooth everything out on here and you get everything all set, use the biggest brush possible. All right, if you use a small brush like this, and you are using the cloning stamp, and I am option clicking here, and I'm like, you know, clicking around, you're going to see all sorts of spots. But if you use a larger brush, it's going to fill in more of like a general area of color. So here I might even be able to steal from, let's see if his forehead's available up here. Option click, come down here to his forehead. All right, the bigger the brush you use, the less you can find those seams. The other thing is the more you mess with this, all right, the more you go over and over and over, it's going to start to smooth out that area again. So you might go back to our filter. You know, you might select, actually, let's use your lasso tool. You might select an area specifically within this piece. You might go to your filter, and you might use, where's our noise here? There it is. You might do noise or add some dust and scratches, you know, and go through that whole process again where you are, let's turn that down a little bit, where you're adding some phony texture into this. And then I'm also going to use my blur again, my Gaussian blur, and I'm going to, there we go, try to make that fit in. And again, I'm doing this very quickly, so I'm not really making sure that it matches. Also, the shading on his forehead is way wrong. But you start to get the idea. So what I'm thinking about here, and this is where the fine art of this sort of comes in, is that I'm really trying to make this as seamless as possible. You know, I'm trying to make this thing, to integrate it, and to make it look like it always belonged there. So I'm using the cloning stamp sometimes, I'm using the patch tool, I'm using the healing brush. You know, there's not always a right tool for the job. It's just more about identifying those areas and trying to do a really great job. You know, like here in this shirt, if I use that patch tool and I outline this crack, right, and I drag it down, I'm doing this on a pattern. So if I just put this anywhere like this, the pattern's going to look weird. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to find a place in my plaid like that the squares actually match up. So when I look at it, it doesn't disturb that pattern. You know, when you see a disturbance in the pattern, then all of a sudden it looks really, really weird. Also, if you see the repetition of a certain mark, like as you're cloning something, like let's say you wanted to smooth out, let's say I want to smooth out his shirt with white, and I'm going to option click. I'm going to click some of this white, and I'm going to paint it in down here. I'm not just going to scrub the whole thing because it's going to copy, you know, you might see like this stain over and over. See how it appears 4 times down here? That looks terrible. So I'm going to option click this, and I'm just going to dot out that stain. I'm going to option click again in a clean white area. I'm going to dot out that stain. I'm going to option in another clean white area and another clean white area. So the idea is to keep your selection, your sample moving around. Because if you don't move that sample around, you're going to keep sampling from that same area. It's going to look really weird. So I like to get in the habit of just keeping my left hand on the option key, and I just sort of, you know, sample a little from here, put it over here. And then again, if I want to smooth out that shirt, I might go back to the healing brush. I'm going to sample a little bit down here. I'm going to use a bigger brush, and I'm going to try to, let's see, sample, and I'm going to just sort of smooth that out a little bit like that. I'm going to sample down here, smooth that out over here. All right. So again, those are the basic simple tools. When you're all done, don't forget to go to Layer, Flatten Image, It'll smash everything flat, and then you can go from there. If you are having a hard time, that's actually some good advice. If you are having a hard time navigating all of this, before you use your cloning stamp and your healing brush, you can go back and flatten your image, and then everything will be on the same layer, and then you can heal away and do whatever you want to do. One last bit of advice is that, let's go to my background here. I'm going to change the sky. Let's just say I wanted to, for whatever reason, I wanted to heal out some of these clouds here. I wanted to heal out on the edge here. I'm going to select my background. I'm going to use my marquee tool, and I'm going to select this area like this. So now when I use my cloning stamp, and I'm going to clone the sky here, Option, click with the mouse, let go. See how it doesn't clone beyond that selection? Here, see how it's getting the clouds in there too? It looks awful. Make my brush a little bigger. All right, Option, click. See how it's not going into the white there? That's because I've restrained it with the marquee tool. If that marquee was not there, and I Option click the sky and I started painting, see how it fills out on the outside edge there? So the marquee tool is really good for restraining something. So even if you're getting like a cheek or a face here, and you want to make sure you're just getting his chin, you can select the area that you want to work in, and then use the cloning stamp just inside this area, and it will only affect inside here. It won't spill over onto your t-shirt here. So you could take a really large area and you could copy it into a small space without it bleeding all over, so that you could sample with a large but paint with a smaller brush essentially. All right, that's all I got. Again, don't forget to flatten, save it as a JPEG. Good luck.